Dzień dobry. Today I thought I'd do a quick video on the Moulinet. Not to be confused with mayonnaise or Moulinet, but the Moulinet, the technique of rotating the saber. Anyway, as usual, I hope you enjoy.
Machasz jak cepę.
So, what exactly is a Moulinet and when and why do we use them? Well, essentially, in a nutshell, when you rotate the saber and throw it back out, that is a Moulinet. Now, there's many different variations on this, which we're going to get to, but in general, how would you use it? There's a few circumstances, but the most common ones would be when you're using the extended guard to load power into a cut. Or perhaps you've already performed the cut and you're reloading for your next cut. There's also some cases where some schools of fencing have advocated after multiple attacks, if they are not successful and your opponent comes towards you, to continuously Moulinet as you retreat, or to Moulinet your way out of the fight, as they say. Now, like I said, there's multiple different versions of the Moulinet. In order to categorize these, to discuss them, I think the most important points of differentiation between them all is where the pivot point is. Now, when I say pivot point, it's like when you have a compass, one of the ones with a needle and a pin, and you stick it into paper, twist it, and you draw a circle. Same thing here. You have a pin, which is the pivot point, and the tip of the shoveler, or saber, if you will, creates the circle. Now, the difference between Moulinets, in my opinion, this is just me, not an absolute master, but someone who's an enthusiast, the easiest way to think about the differences between each type of Moulinet is to categorize them by where exactly the pivot point is, because that is going to result in a completely different technique. Now, the advantage of a larger pivot point means that the sword swings in a much larger motion, thus it has more power. A smaller pivot point means that it may be quicker, get to the target faster, not as much power, but it definitely arrives quicker and may take the person by surprise a lot more easily. Another factor too is the larger the pivot point, the more open one is. However, the smaller the pivot point, the more likely you are to keep a steel in front of you while you perform your Moulinet, thus you are better protected. Anyway, we'll go through them one by one, starting at the biggest Moulinet possible to what I believe is the smallest Moulinet. And if I miss one or I get one wrong, feel free to tell me in the comments. Like I said, I'm just a very enthusiastic practitioner and I don't claim to be some kind of world-class expert, but I hope we can all learn together. Okay, so in my opinion, the largest possible Moulinet you could do is if you actually use your shoulder itself as the pivot point. So if you can imagine, I'm trying not to slice my own roof here, you cut and cut, so you're creating this circle purely with your shoulder. Now, this might be something only a noob will do in a stand-in, like one-on-one dueling situation, because if I go, ugh, I'm so open to every attack and you can see it come in. If I've missed with the first cut and I'll pull it all the way back here and go for the second cut, there's a very low chance of success. So when would you possibly even use this? Well, the saber is often a cavalry weapon, so I could imagine if you're riding your horsey down, you can raise it up high, you can cut this guy, you can smash that guy, because they got no chance to retaliate, you're going through a crowd. So you can basically just use your whole shoulder to Moulinet this way, each side of you. And also you've got to work around the horse's head. There's no point in this tight Moulinet if it's going to go straight through your horse's face. So I guess in that situation that might make sense. However, throwing a Moulinet with your shoulder, to me, it leaves you very open in a stand-in confrontation, unless you've completely displaced their blade or knocked it out of their hand, or you got right around to them using footwork in a way where their defense is completely compromised. Then you can wind up and deliver your decapitation shot. Oh, holy shit, decapitation! Oh, you are a savage. Okay, so we've started at the shoulder joint as the largest possible Moulinet. The next joint down is your elbow. Can you deliver Moulinets with your elbow? Well, yes, you can. Cut this way. Cut this way. You can deliver the Moulinet solely from the elbow fairly much, and it's a fairly powerful cut. If you're doing this kind of extended guard, you can like load it up and cut from the elbow. Now, has some advantages and some disadvantages in my opinion. The not applicable to me personally because I prefer this style of grip here and like cutting with the fingers as I've discussed previously. However, if you prefer this particular grip like that, then this Moulinet is going to be very much part of your arsenal. Cutting that way there, you can cut that way there, you can parry, load it up and cut, and it works very well with this style grip. In fact, you can sort of like, if you use your shoulder, elbow I should say, to deliver this kind of Moulinet, you can get some real reach if you're holding it here instead of here. See the difference in reach with that grip? Very nice. However, the one disadvantage of it is, like I said, you're sacrificing a bit of speed and a bit of openness. Conceivably, if I've cut or whatever situation I'm in, like I said, you use Moulinets in a variety of circumstances. If I withdraw to here and deliver my Moulinet this way, all this time my forearm and upper arm is open to attack. Now it's not as badly open as if I go "Rah!" and try to throw the shoulder, but there is a slight moment that it's open, so you might want to pick and choose when you use this style of Moulinet. And like I said, you can tell the pivot point has moved down one joint on my arm, and already we've got a massively tighter technique, a little bit faster, not quite as open, but like I said, we're still going to keep going till we get the smallest and tightest possible technique. Now, the most common Moulinet I've seen people use is with the wrist. You throw the Moulinet this way, you can throw it that way, whichever way pleases you, and it's fairly good. You can do this very quick with only the wrist joint on its own, and it delivers it fast. Like I said, the pivot point's all the way down here, right out. You can do a full extension pretty much, so the sword is always out in front of you, and it's very tight. You can nearly get those almost like you're going to shave your own ear off. They're that tight Moulinets. And this is a good point to say that while if you're doing the thrusting technique, you might have your hand out here. If you're going to throw very tight Moulinets, for obvious reasons, you want to keep your offhand in check, either behind you or maybe tuck it in your pants here, or as I like to, because I've done a lot of unarmed combat, so I'm used to having it close, to have it in this style position. You don't want your hand floating out here too much if Moulinets are going to be part of your arsenal. And another advantage of the wrist Moulinet is with this grip here, again, it works very well. You can really just throw it out there very easily. Now, what's the disadvantage of the wrist Moulinet? Well, your wrist is a very flexible joint, however, it's not infinitely flexible. So if you notice, as you turn the wrist over, to get a really tight one with the blade, the elbow must pop out that way. It pops out a little bit if you're using only the wrist from a fixed grip. Likewise, if you go this way, the elbow pops in a bit and you throw there. So you must get the Moulinet very tight. You must sacrifice the elbow position a bit so it comes a bit back towards you, but like I said, this is just a very slight movement. Otherwise, cane with wrist Moulinet is very good. Now with the wrist Moulinet, we got to the stage where our pivot point is literally at your wrist. Now you might think, well, it can't go out much further than that. Well, when you're doing the finger cuts, which I talked about in the previous video, it's actually possible to put the pivot point more closer actually on the handle than the wrist itself. Now this seems like only a fraction of an amount of room, maybe 2 inches or so. However, the technique can be infinitely tighter, as I'm going to show you. Now if you loosen up with the wrist, for example, I've cut, if I use my fingers here like that, it can be very quick like that, and you really, the elbow flexion is very minimal. You literally do not, you can get so tight to your body. Oof, don't want to get that nose. That's unbelievable with so little. Well, it's just nothing. You don't have to give up the elbow position at all if you're using the fingers. Well, how is this possible? Now, this is a good point to bring up something else very important. You never allow your wrist to collapse inward at any point during saber fencing. I think every school universally agrees on this, unless you're doing sports saber where they do this as a parry, but I don't know anything about that. I'm told that's how they do it, and that will do it well in Olympic style fencing. Not necessarily for martial arts where some dude's going to come at you full force with an actual heavy weapon or heavier weapon. You always rotate the wrist outward. If you have a fixed grip or if you're using the finger cuts, the wrist goes outward. Even when you block this side, it's outward, because that's a very hard structure to break. Now, how would you so when you Moulinet, you never, even when you're using a fixed grip, you never allow the wrist to come in. So I'm not doing this. It's always the wrist bends back towards me. Now, an easy way to remember this is to say you're checking the time, particularly when you're using the fingers. So I'm out here, I've loosened up my grip here, my little finger still has contact, and it's like I'm checking the time. So you're out here, the wrist bends backwards, so I'm not actually rolling the wrist like with the wrist Moulinet. The wrist is just doing that. And the entire arm at the shoulder is rotating over that way. So it's that way, and then cut. All together though creates a circle using 2 lines that are straight to create the circle. So you're here, basically here, and then cut. You're out, the arm rotates, the wrist bends, I check the time for another cut. Now it's hard to do slowly, but when you do it fast, you get a real feel for how that goes. And that is very quick, and the pivot point is all the way down in the handle, because as you rotate the blade, it's pretty much like it's leaving your grip of your little finger for a moment, and then going out, and going out. So it's an interplay of the fingers. As you withdraw and check the time, the index finger and the thumb holds the shabla, and then as you send it back out, they loosen up, and the little finger draws it back towards you. Little finger must maintain contact the entire time. You don't fully let go like this. That's not what I'm advocating or the way I've been taught. But if you're here, like that. So it's a very good one, very tight, it's very close, it's right out in the opponent's face, and we're using our fingers. You might think that there's no way you can get a tighter, more extended Moulinet than this. However, there is one more technique you can use. Alright, at this point in the video, we've started at our shoulder, then our elbow, then our wrist, now our very fingertips. Surely this is why I wrap it up, because that's about as far out and as tight of a pivot point as you can get on a Moulinet. However, there is one more technique. Now this is quite a difficult one to understand, so I hope you bear with me and my explanation makes sense. But now we're going to try and put the pivot point into the center of the blade fairly much, or perhaps the first third of it, depending on how you perform this technique. Now, the actual mechanical technique with our arm is almost identical to the finger cuts. I suppose you could perform this with the wrist. I've always performed it with the finger cuts, which is my preferred method. Each to their own, use whatever's best for you, by all means. So, how do you make the pivot point the center of the blade? Well, if you can imagine that being fixed, in position. This is awkward to show. As I loosen my grip, I raise my arm at the shoulder, and then as I retake it, I lower my arm at the shoulder like that. So if you imagine, I'll try to do this very slow. It's here, hand goes up, hand goes down, hand goes up, hand goes down, hand goes up. At my shoulder, the arm stays fully extended, checking the time, and then it's time to go back down. Hand goes up, hand goes down. Now this is somewhat different, as in the blade is not coming all the way back. It probably has the least amount of power. However, what this lacks in power, it makes up for not only in speed and quickness, but also in protection. So I do it from front on. Those finger Moulinets I discussed earlier, for example, were here like that, here like that. See, it's very close. The blade comes back and arches that way. So check the time and come down. What this is actually doing is you're here, your arm goes up, around, and then comes out that way. So it's a very slight Moulinet. As you can see, the central point as your hand is raised, it is basically a hanging guard or parry, and then it goes out. So this all in itself can be, now every Moulinet can do this. For example, I can like parry here and then cut here, like this way here, and Moulinet straight off the cut. Or even with elbow ones, you can parry here and cut. You can always add a parry to the middle of the Moulinet. However, this one here is literally a hanging guard halfway through the motion. So you've cut here and then straight back down. Cut here and straight back down. So I might have delivered one cut, the arm raises straight up from the shoulder as I check the time, and instead of coming all the way back, it stays there and then out. So in effect, the Moulinet is working around the center of the blade. So we're keeping it that far out, putting the pivot point in the middle of the blade by literally raising the arm and keeping it tight and dropping the arm. So instead of the arm staying stationary and throwing it out this way, raise the arm, drop it, raise the arm, drop it. Now you can always do this with everyone. Even if we want to do this one here, we can come up and then down. However, in order to make this technique actually work, in order to put the pivot point down the end of the blade, you have to raise and lower the arm, because in essence this is almost making a circle. Now you might ask when you'd use this one. I feel this one here works best if you are advancing. For example, I cut and then I might raise the arm and then lunge. So you may cut the opponent, raise the arm and then lunge like that, very quick. So you might deliver it, raise the arm as you come in, and then you've cut. So I think this works best when you're going forward. So there you have it. These are all the Moulinets I know. If you know another one, let me know. And I hope you've enjoyed the video. Till next time, David Zinger.